Um, so before this, I was thinking about virology, and there's a there's a lot of prominent people in the health freedom movement that say that it's not important to focus on virology right now, like the truth that there's no proof that adheres to the scientific method or logic for the existence of viruses. And
Hmm.
I started thinking about this, and it's like it kind of relates to what we're going to talk about with authority. Is
Hmm.
if you had something that you discovered, just more philosophically, overarchingly, that you know to be true, or at the least pretty close to the truth on an issue, right? And that I think in most cases we can never know the objective truth from every single angle because we just don't have every single angle on any given issue. But nonetheless, something that was as close as it could possibly be to the truth, and the overwhelming majority of society was not in line with it, and
Hmm.
it was a truth that could empower society to a
Hmm.
new direction. Would you not speak that truth because society's not ready to hear it?
It's a foundational issue. Like even the topic that we're talking about, I have thought about that in comparison to virology because um here's where there's a lot of common ground, like what you just mentioned for sure. And then the other one is people are resistant to the idea that there's no scientific evidence for the existence of viruses because, well, if it's not a virus, then what is it? So there's this appearance of contagious disease. So it has to be a virus, right? But we don't know because we haven't given it sufficient attention in scientific research to propose, like, this is for sure the paradigm that will best replace our understanding of contagious disease.
Yep.
And it's the same with authority, I think.
I've drawn a lot of parallels myself
Hmm.
between virology and that whole charade of pathogenic viruses, and that it's an illusion, and also Santa Claus and unicorns and things like that. But then also
Hmm.
authority. There's a ton of parallels between the two, and the pervasive nature of
Hmm.
both of them, and how it really is based on a conditioned belief. And really, that conditioned belief can bring about legitimate reactions to something that doesn't even exist.
Right.
And like the best analogy, and this applies to both um, authority and virology, is Santa Claus. Um, Several things in my environment, the songs, the decorations, the half-eaten cookies and milk on Christmas, um, the stories, the movies, the piece of beard found in the fireplace on Christmas morning, the quote reindeer tracks in the yard, the Santa Claus sleigh tracking app, the joy that people are experiencing, or on the other side for the kids who are told you're not behaving, your Santa's going to bring you a lump of coal, the fear that
Hmm.
people are experiencing. All of those things point to the existence of Santa Claus, so he must be real,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And it's like, no, it's our conditioned belief, or children's conditioned belief surrounding Santa Claus, that makes him real. And yes, children have measurable and observable biological responses to the idea of Santa Claus. And that's
Hmm.
just the same thing with this. It's like when talking about authority, people, it's an idea that's so ingrained in our
Yeah.
mind that we can't even think outside of the box
Yep.
of it. So when you start pointing to authority being an illusion, people freak out. I would say more
Uh-huh.
on this topic than on the virus thing, or
Yep.
anything else.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing about authority conditioning around that topic is that it's multi-generational. I mean, we're talking about, like, this isn't just conditioned in us from birth. This is like conditioned in us for how many generations, how many centuries, how many millennia. And this has just been handed down. It's almost coded in our bodies, in our minds, in our psyche, in our subconscious. And another area in which there's crossover with the virology conversation is that when you begin to question authority in the role of, say, something like government, and you say, well, it's government authority is illegitimate, it's an illusion, then the knee-jerk reaction that people have, similar to virology, is, well, then what else? What would you do in its place? It's like, we need this belief, we need this paradigm, because what else would it possibly be? And that's so, when I have this conversation with other people, that's like the immediate response. Well, we need government. Well, why?
Yeah, and that's the thing is I was on a podcast this morning with a guy by the name of Dakota Cohen, and he'll probably listen to this too. He listens to my show, and it was one of my favorite conversations I've had in a while. And we talked about several instances of this tight window that I hesitate to say they, because it's really like ourselves keeping us trapped in it. This tight window of discourse that is allowed, and what that looks like with authority is you're talking about the left versus right paradigm, and then possibly like libertarianism, right? Like, let's get in a libertarian candidate.
For sure. In America, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in America, but it's like there's a whole separate conversation that exists outside this box, and we've been so conditioned to just think about this
Yeah.
conversation from within this box. When you start pointing to something outside of it, everyone thinks you're crazy. And it's like, I don't want to say this applies in every case, but again, the parallel between virology and authority is when you point to the illusion of authority altogether, and that not even that votes don't count, which, I do think that, but I can't ever prove whether they do or do not count. I think it's all irrelevant, because this is more coming at the philosophical approach of should we even be voting?
Right.
But when you point to that, both the left and the right get upset with you. When you point to the reality that there is no proof of virology, both the alternative perspective, the anti-vax community and the vax community get upset with you. And of course, that isn't always the case where you're pointing to something. Like, there could be cases where you're pointing to something that is just so absolutely illogical. And that's honestly what they're thinking, though, because they've been so conditioned to believe this. But the point is, there's a whole separate category of discourse outside of this. So the first thing I want to ask you, and I'll share my thoughts because it applies to me too, is how did you come to understand this, having come from a military background?
Yeah, it's been a journey for sure. So, like you, like essentially everyone, I was conditioned with this belief in authority. And I'll also say, okay, so before I start talking about my sort of evolution in regards to this, I'll say that I'm still working this out, right? So when it comes to authority, like I have done the work mentally, and doing the work mentally to sort of overcome my attachment to this idea of authority, that other men and women have the right to tell me what to do and what not to do. And viscerally, emotionally, I still have fear responses to authority, to police, to people in positions of so-called authority. And so there's still this visceral response that I'm starting to work out. I'm not arrived. I'm not complete in this process yet. But I'll tell you what, when I was younger, there was a very different dynamic that I had in regards to authority. It was very immature. It was very childish. And it came from this place of like rebelliousness, right? Like, you don't get to tell me what to do. I'm going to do what I want. And kind of this punk rock era in the late 90s, early 2000s, and you're not in fucking charge of me. And there's a very, very different energy from Chris when he was a child to Chris now as a grown man. And I will say that I think skipping forward to 2020 and beyond, and all of the nonsense and absurdity that has happened since then, has called me into has called me up into sovereignty, into mature manhood, into mature adulthood, and claiming my own inner authority and my own inner power. And it's been super fucking uncomfortable, because we were surrounded by this programming. You have to wear a mask. And it was a constant reminder. Time you turn on the TV or the radio or had conversations, or you went out in public and you shopped at the market and you saw the arrows and you saw the signs with the mass, and there was this cultural sort of frenzy that was happening. And so if you didn't want to wear a mask, you were an outcast. You were denigrated. You were ridiculed. You were called names. You were often. It happened to me a couple times where I was literally removed from stores, but it wasn't coming from this like you don't tell me what to do energy. It was like I don't want to play make believe. I
Yeah.
literally do not believe what's happening here. And as a grown, mature adult man, I think it is incumbent on me to do the right thing, which I think is to not go along with this game of
Yes.
fear and make believe.
That's the big difference. Just to interject real quick here, then I want to hear you continue on with your story. Is when you're talking about like the punk rock rebellious era,
Mm-hmm.
the implications there is it's just I don't want to hear what you have to say, and I'm going to go do what I want. That may lead to me doing a bunch of immoral and unethical shit, infringing and imposing upon other people, and that's the huge misconception
Mm-hmm.
about anarchy slash voluntarism that I
Mm-hmm.
had bought into prior to learning the truth about it. Because it's nothing of the sorts.
Right.
It's about instilling true moral principles in all conversations for now, at least on objective versus subjective morality side,
Mm-hmm.
but true what a community or a family or an individual comes to terms with as their own morality, and at the least something we can all agree on, the non-aggression principle, and not imposing our will and our way of thinking and our own subjective moral position onto other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that that is so different than the
Mm-hmm.
punk rock like rebellious just do whatever the hell I want, which leads to behaving immorally and
Mm-hmm.
unethically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So just a completely different energy. And then of course, when it came to these mandates, and they wanted to, um, they were threatening me with being removed from medical school, and if I didn't go along with injecting myself with poison or with this mandated testing, which also has poison in it, then and so it was an issue of conscience, and it was an uncomfortable issue of what I felt like was ethical disobedience. And I just was not willing to sacrifice what my conscience was telling me, my personal integrity, my bodily autonomy. And so that's the energy that was coming from this, of like being called up and out into the next level of maturity, of mature manhood. And so that's kind of was the 2020 and beyond. All that scenario was the catalyst for me to begin questioning, okay, so the government is pushing this agenda, is pushing these shots, is trying to tell us what to do, what not to do. People are losing their jobs, people are losing their friends and family. And how do they have the right really to do all of this? Like, so I began questioning. And prior to that, like, I was bought into the American political system deeply. you know I was very patriotic, like America's the best, I love my country. I voluntarily signed my name on a dotted line as an airborne infantryman in the United States Army to give my life fighting for this system, you know? And so that's my background. And we're talking like I have generations of men in my family who've served. My great grandfather, like everyone in our family, is just so proud of this man who served in World War II, and then worked for the State Department, and traveled the world and all this. So I have like this deep patriotism. And then 2020 happens, and I'm beginning to question, like, well, hold on a minute, like, I don't think that this is the way that things are supposed to be. What about individuals who feel like their consciences are being violated, and their bodies are being violated, and they're being threatened with losing their their livings, their careers, and to be able to feed their families and support themselves and their families. So that was the seed. That was the seed for me.
And
And go ahead.
quick question on that. So, what were, just because I'm trying to get an understanding of the framework you're coming from, because like
Mhm.
you, prior to this whole charade of the last 3 years, I was, for the most part, bought into the political system. The
Mhm.
political system, not the government, and it's different. Like
Right, right,
I
yeah,
knew
yeah.
the government was corrupt as shit, even though I was an officer in the army. But
Mhm.
I knew 9/11 was an inside job. But I was still like, there's some elements to the political system. I think if we just have the right candidate, we can get on the right track, type of
Mhm.
thing. And then
Mhm.
you know, so but my health perceptions prior to this were very clear. I was opposed to vaccines. So where were you at
Mm.
in terms of your health perspective prior to all this?
With vaccines and such.
Just in general, yeah, like natural
Yeah.
health, like allopathic. I mean, you're going to medical school, but like you seem very, very knowledgeable on terrain and lack of proof
Mhm.
virology and all those things. So I just want to know where you're coming from before this.
Yeah. Okay. So I was on the conventional med school track back in 2008, 2009. And I started doing my pre med. I was going to Columbia University in New York City, and I was doing my pre med, and I was working in emergency medicine clinical research at a large hospital there in Manhattan. And um, that so that was my track, and I was kind of bought into the conventional medical paradigm. I didn't really know a whole lot outside of that. I knew that herbs existed. I knew that there was sort of other things that you could do that weren't really useful or very helpful with health. That was my perception at the time. And as I was working in the hospital, I interacted a lot with the residents and the attendings, and one thing I noticed that almost across the board was that they were fucking miserable. And the conversations that I was able to have with some of the residents was like they were warning me like, Chris, don't do it, don't go. And we're locked in now. We have $500,000 in debt, and like we have to do this, but like, you're not gonna have a life. Like, you're gonna be miserable. It's not what you think. And and I began really questioning a lot of my beliefs around a healing profession. And what I was observing was that it wasn't really a healing profession, and people weren't really getting well. And simultaneously, as I'm doing my pre med and I'm doing this research in the hospital, my best friend at the time, who was an Iraq war veteran, he'd done 2 years in Iraq. He got stop loss. So he did a year tour, and then he got stop loss, and he did another year. So 24 months in Iraq. And he was there in the late 2000s. So a lot of really horrific, horrendous stuff that happened that he saw, that he participated in. And we'd stay up late sitting out on the stoop of his brownstone on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, drinking beers and smoking cigarettes at the time. I don't smoke anymore. But he would open up to me, and he'd tell me some of the stuff that he saw and that kept him up at night, and then the nightmares he had and the regrets. And he was being treated by multiple doctors for injuries. He'd been blown up a few times, and um, PTSD, anxiety, depression, sleeplessness. So he's on a cocktail of different drugs. He's seeing all these practitioners, and one summer, he ended up accidentally overdosing and died in his sleep, taking his meds as prescribed by his doctors. And
Yeah.
that's a yeah, yes. I mean, still, like, I'm still heartbroken over this. Like, Aaron was he was a good man. He's one of the best friends a guy could ever ask for. And that really fucked me up in terms of what I thought about conventional medicine. And so I decided to walk away from pre-med or from medicine. And that's when I actually joined the army and became an infantryman. I served in the 82nd Airborne. And when I got out, I was kind of at this place of like, well, I definitely don't want to be an MD or DO. I have all this education, I have this experience. At that point, I was in my early 30s. And that's when I began to look into other sort of natural health career paths. And I found Chinese medicine, and applied to a school that taught classical Chinese medicine in Portland, Oregon. And I started going, and I did a year there, and it was also a naturopathic medical school. So I became a dual degree student, and I was studying Chinese medicine and naturopathic medicine. So that's the long story of like, yeah, to
Got it.
answer your question of where I've come from. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. just wanted to get a clear picture of that. And then you said that the initial seeds were planted during COVID regarding, I say COVID, I mean the charade. Like
The
I
charade.
think
Yeah.
people generally know what I mean.
Yeah.
That was like hung up in my mind because I had someone comment on one of my recent videos. Why do you keep saying COVID in this episode? I'm like, dude, you already know my perceptions. I'm just saying like everything that's happened in the last 3 years. But the point is, so you had those initial seeds planted, but when did you make the leap from questioning the government in terms of its current state and its form and its application and the laws, codes, acts, and statutes, and then taking the next step of like, whoa, maybe we don't need government at all. Maybe we don't need authority at all. When did you start questioning that? And then after that, I want to sort of lay the context for the audience on what is voluntarism, and then what it is we mean by government itself, because I think we need to sort of define terms.
Yeah. Well, 2020 we had an election, and that whole year, I mean, it was a frenzy, right? There was a lot of shit going on, and I was in Portland at the time, going to school. And so in Portland, you had all these riots. You had different various groups that took over downtown, and there was a lot of upheaval. But I was still bought into this political system, and I thought, well, we just need to fight harder. I was still outsourcing my hope and my hope for change to the two-party system here in America. And I thought, well, if we just get the right people in office, and things will change, and all this stuff will go away. And man, 2020, 2021, like nothing fucking changed. And so many people that I know were involved in like trying to move the ball politically, and trying to accomplish change within that system, that political system that we have, and nothing's changing. And I was a part of a local group here of political activists that met once a week, and they've actually done some good stuff in local government, like county and city government. And
I appreciate that, because there is nuance.
yeah.
Like I had Renette Cinema on a previous episode, and yeah, that's a separate conversation, or maybe something we can get to down the line on this episode. But yes, like
Yeah,
there's some nuance there.
for sure. And I do want to acknowledge that too. Like, but yeah, so I'm coming out of this super disillusioned space, and like nothing's changing, and I was like really bought in this system, and I'm thinking I'm gonna really invest my time and my energy, and like I'm gonna protest, I'm gonna be an activist, and I'm gonna make the phone calls, I'm gonna write the emails, and I'm gonna send the letters, and nothing's fucking changing. And I'm looking back at the last several decades, and I'm like, wait, we've been doing this for how long, and nothing's changed. Like maybe this system isn't actually designed for us. Maybe it's not, maybe we don't actually win playing by the rules, and we're just wasting a whole lot of time and energy trying to change things within this paradigm, within this political paradigm. And so I began to shift, and as I mentioned, like I'm starting to see, like, my devotion isn't to the law. My devotion is to my internal compass of right and wrong, of living in integrity, of being a grown man, and learning how to say no to the things that really are not in alignment and do not resonate with me, and yes to the things that are in alignment, whether or not there's a law that tells me that that's okay.
Which is such a mind-blowing concept.
It seems like common sense, though.
I say that like it's ironic that it's a mind-blowing concept. Yes, because it is common sense, and that's the problem of authority. This illusion of authority has become so pervasive that we now are conflating the laws, codes, acts, and statutes. And yes, there is some crossover with what most would say is a commonly held, dare I say, objective moral position. So there is some crossover there, but because we've conflated the laws, codes, acts, and statutes with morality when they're not, we are fundamentally an immoral and morally bankrupt society. And whether or not we're supposed to be a democracy or a republic is not relevant, because in either case that's mob rules. And what that means
Yeah.
is the opinions and the perspectives on morality from the majority, if it is indeed done this way, let's assume that there's not manipulation and fraud occurring from the inside. In a perfect scenario with a democracy or republic, it is still the opinions and perspectives of the majority being imposed upon via laws, codes, acts, and
Yeah.
statutes the rest of the population. What happens when the position of the majority is severely misled on
Yep.
any number of topics? And then regardless of whether they're misled or not, that then creates a situation where the people themselves are looking to authority for what to do on any position, which is what happened this last 3 years.
Yeah.
Everyone turned to authority rather than wrestling with, does this sit right with me?
Yeah.
Does this make sense logically, ethically, morally, scientifically? No, I can't wrestle with those things. I'm just turning to authority because I've conflated with and I'm in some cases don't even know what a moral position is, haven't had to wrestle with those at all. And I'm just turning to authority and asking them, or just looking to them, what am I supposed to do? That's the moral position.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with this whole thing. And I want to set the context too of where we're coming from. And maybe you and I can build this together, because I don't want to just steal my ideological framework from Jack Lloyd and Larkin Rose and these other people. But like, what is your, if you could define government, and then we'll define authority, and then we'll define voluntarism, what would you say government is?
Okay, so yeah, you mentioned Larkin Rose, and before I answer that question, I just want to say, like, my position, that the conclusions that I've come to have been largely my own, so I've wrestled through this internally myself, and continuing to work this out, and then I discovered Larkin Rose in the last year, and what Larkin Rose has done for me is like give voice to some of the same conclusions that I've come to on my own.
I'll say that the same too. Like, when I discovered Larkin's work, also within the last year, by the way, like in early 2022, I'd heard him mentioned before, but because I would say things, and my stuff would be shared across social media and be like, dude, Larkin says, I'm like, who is this? Like, finally, he ended up retweeting one of my things, and I was like, okay, I really need to look into this guy. And then so I found his book, read it all the way through, and was like, this thing is freaking incredible. And then now I've just almost finished reading it through it again the second time. But same with me. I came to this conclusion on my own. It's like Eric Coppolino said on a recent video. This guy was challenging him and essentially saying, you must have established your no virus position from listening to Tom and Andy. You've memorized their arguments. And he said, no, I found this before Tom and Andy even did. I did this during HIV/AIDS. I came to my own conclusion. And then I found Tom and Andy, and I was like, oh, these guys are saying the same thing that I'm saying in some different ways, or maybe contextualizing things better, verbalizing things better. It's the same thing with this. So I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. We'll come back around to Larkin Rose probably. But to answer your question, what is government? So the way that I understand government is, well, first of all, government doesn't exist. Like, it is a complete illusion. It's a complete fabrication. It's an idea. And it's an idea that has been inserted into our belief system, into our paradigm. But fundamentally, when you reduce it down, government is a small group of men and women who believe that they have the right to enforce their will on a larger population of men and women under threat of force. You need to do what we said, and we have the right to tell you to do what we said. And if you don't, then we will take your things. We will put you in jail, et cetera, et cetera. But that fundamentally is what government is to me. It's an illusion. It's just a small group of men and women.
I don't think I have anything to add to that. I think that's perfect. Yeah. Okay. So then authority.
Yeah. Okay. That's actually a great question, because we need to differentiate between kinds of authority.
Yep.
So there is one kind of authority which is like an authority on a subject matter, an expert, someone who's very informed. Okay, like sure, there are authorities on certain subject matters. I can acknowledge that. That's not an illusion. That's real.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's parental authority, and I'm a father of two girls, and so I have some experiential knowledge of what parental authority is, and that's real. You're a dad. Like
Yeah.
we have a responsibility to raise our children and to make decisions. We're ultimately responsible for them as children.
Yeah. And I want to
Um,
get into parenting sort of
yeah,
towards the end of this, but yeah,
yeah, because
exactly.
that's a
I do.
great conversation
Yep.
in context of all of this. And then there is like government authority or police authority. And there's other kinds of authority we can talk about, but like for the sake of this conversation, yeah, that is I believe the illusion right there
Yep.
is that a man or woman who is taking on himself a title or a uniform has authority to do certain things in the name of government or in the name of law
Yes.
that other men and women don't have the right to do.
And
Right.
and then the thing that I would add to that, and this is the distinguishing point between the alleged entity that is the government, again, which is
Mm,
just like you said, just a group of men and women who believe they have the right to. On the flip side of that, authority and the belief in it is that we as the subjects, as the people, believe that those
mhm.
people who call themselves government of any form have the right to dictate, issue commands, tell us what to do, and
Yeah.
have the exclusive moral justification to use force against those who don't comply. Not
Mhm.
to bring Larkin into this too much, but I'm sure we're going to over the nature of this, just because he has so many amazing points throughout his book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, and in all of his videos. What distinguishes government from a gang
Mhm.
is that no one believes, or most people wouldn't believe that a gang has the right to do what they do. The gang believes that they do, which is why they do it,
Right.
but society doesn't project this false belief onto the gang that they have a moral
Mhm.
justification to do what they're doing.
Mhm. They
That's
have
the
that
difference.
they have an exclusive moral right.
Yes, an
Yeah.
exclusive moral right, and that's the difference. Government, the people believe that it has the
Yeah.
exclusive moral right to do that, which
Yeah.
almost makes it more dangerous, which is why he calls it the most
Yes.
dangerous superstition, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so do you have anything to add there?
Yeah. No, I think one way to look at that, and this is kind of how I describe this to people I'm having a conversation with, is like it's like the mafia, right? And let's say you're in Boston in the 1970s, and a group of thugs comes in your shop as a store owner, and they say, you're going to give us $2,000 a week and we'll protect you, and if you don't, we're going to cut off your thumb, you know. And uh anybody objectively looking at that, even under the paradigm that they were functioning, that the government actually is a legitimate authority, they look at that and they go, well, that's bullshit, that's crazy, you know. That's immoral. But it is no different than government. The government says, oh, we'll take care of your roads, and we'll provide you certain services, and you're going to pay us 25% of your income, and if you don't, we're going to throw you in jail. It's the same fucking
It's
thing.
the same.
It's just that the only difference is that we've been convinced to think that, well, the government, they're doing the same shit, but that's okay for them.
Yeah.
And then the mafia, well, that's the mob. I mean, shit, like that's not okay.
It really, like, that's why I'm laughing though, because it is literally the exact same thing. And then again, you'll ask someone to find the difference and they can't, but they still have resistance to this notion that really they are the same thing.
Yeah.
And okay, so to build off that, and then we'll sort of get to this piece of it towards the end, because this, I think, comes through the dismantling of the misconception of the illusion of authority in government. But we should still define terms of like, I don't like calling it anarchism,
Mm-hmm.
just because of the negative connotation associated with that.
Yeah.
I think voluntarism is a more appropriate um, name for it. So what is voluntarism?
Mm, yeah, the way that I understand voluntarism is that for any social contract to be ethical or moral, it has to be between two consenting, mutually consenting adults of sound mind. And the social contracts that we live under currently are not between mutually consenting entities, between two mutually consenting men and women. They are, it's very top heavy. It's
Yep.
very hierarchical. You will do this or you will pay. And so I think that it is fundamentally unethical. But yeah, voluntarism, as I understand it, in the position that I hold, is that it has to be mutually consenting between two adults of sound mind, and that consent can be withdrawn at any time.
Exactly. Yes. I think that's spot on. And to the point that the system that we're in right now, I will both acknowledge, and this could get off on a tangent on common law, so I don't want to go there too far, but that a lot of what has happened the last 3 years required our consent. And for those who are just like, no, I'm not doing it, we've been able to, for the most part, live a free and happy and healthy life. And on top of that, had we, and we'll also get to this later, hopefully, that had we all just simply said no
Mm-hmm.
and just understood that that's all an illusion, them telling us
Mm-hmm.
what to do and just continued on with our life, we would have been free. But in the United States, overwhelmingly, all that's happened the last 3 years has required our consent. Now, with that though, we did not consent to, because we were not an adult, partaking or participating in this system that we currently live in. And that
Mm-hmm.
again goes off on a tangent in common law and the nature of the birth certificate and the social security number and things like that, which are relevant conversations. But the point
Mm-hmm.
is, we were not consenting to that. I couldn't
Right.
have consented to that. I was a freaking newborn baby, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's degrees and levels of consent. And even within uh, the lurches of this corrupt system, we can still, just by standing on our own 2 feet and our own ground and understanding that freedom comes within us, live a pretty happy and free and healthy life. But there's a line of a collective of people succumbing to tyranny, which, like,
Mm-hmm.
I've said this before, and having a conversation about this topic with a friend of mine, he said, Alec, there's people in Australia who are doing exactly what you're advocating for, who said, no, I'm not partaking in the system. And then they were just thrown in jail.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yeah, because Australia collectively succumbed to tyranny to a level where they said men and women who call themselves government are saying that our guns need to be given back. So we all
Right.
gave back our guns. So they're already a few steps down that line of
Yeah.
tyranny as a collective, which does make it harder for them to swing the pendulum back the other way and understanding that authority is an illusion. And luckily, we still have our guns in most
Mm-hmm.
places in America.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. No, that's a really important point to draw out, is this collective consent. And it is scary because a collective of individuals is made up of individuals, right? And so as an individual, it is a very scary thing. Like the example you gave in Australia, to stand up against so-called government and say, no, I'm not going to do this, and to risk retribution and being thrown in jail or something like that. But if a critical mass of individuals stood up and said, no, including the police who enforce these insane policies, just said no, then it would all dissipate, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is an important point, that it's a collective consent of a sort.
Yeah. And I said, we'll get to this later, but actually let's just go there right now, because it makes sense too. So I've used this example before, probably on my podcast, and people may have heard this, but what I loved about the Canadian trucker convoy was this show of unity, right? Like, of course, massive show of unity, raising awareness to a certain level, even within the mainstream, of the issue of the vaccine mandates and how they're unethical and immoral. What I did not like about it, and I think this is more important, is that it was upwards of 500,000 people, which is a significant portion of Canada's small population, coming together and saying, you have power over me.
Yeah.
I don't like it. I don't like that you have power over me. And this is us uniting, just saying, we don't like that you have power over us. And we want you to stop having power over us in this form, in this way, rather than that mass talking about like the collective's decisions and the collective just saying no more. If that mass of 500,000 people had simply just stayed home and all decided together, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore. It doesn't require belligerence, doesn't require hostility, just all in mass, just like, no, I'm not doing this anymore. Because I'm pretty sure there's police officers in the mix there. There was military members in the mix there, part of that trucker convoy. And if all those people from various entities, both ones that are supposed to act as agents of authority and then also ones who are subjects of authority, just simply said, I'm not doing this anymore, man. I'm going to live a free and happy, healthy life. And I don't recognize your authority as legitimate. None of this would have happened. Apply that to the same thing in the United States with what's happened with this whole charade of the last 3 years. Yes, I see a lot of the health freedom community raising awareness to the within the system, how they're not adhering to their own laws, which is true, right? Because, 21 US Code 360 BBB-3, which says anything under emergency use cannot be mandated. And then even for military members, 10 US Code 1107 Alpha, same thing, right? So of course there is, within the constraints of the current system, ways to sort of distance yourself from what's happened the last 3 years. But regardless of all that, had a mass number of people who authentically did not want to do any of this nonsense, just simply said, no, I'm not doing it. None of it would have happened. None of this would have happened.
Yeah. Such a good point, man. Because when you're out protesting and you're doing the activist stuff, what you're essentially saying is, you do have this authority, you do have this decision-making power, and I'm essentially out here begging you to change your mind. And that is taking the power that you have, and it's voluntarily handing it back over to them, and it's saying like, no, you do have this power, please don't do this to us. But if we simply choose to live as free men and women and say, no, that doesn't agree with me, that's not in alignment, that's out of integrity for me, thanks but no thanks, I'm going on with my life. Such a critical point to make, and I was following the trucker convoy, the freedom convoy, and there's a part of me that's like, yeah, this is awesome, and you're kind of cheerleading for them. But at the same time, when you step back and look at it, it's the same. I came to the same conclusions. I'm like, yeah, but you're still there begging for them to change your mind or their minds. So what are we really accomplishing here? We're still acknowledging that they have this authority.
Yeah. And there's again, everything over the last 3 years overwhelmingly, and I can only speak to the US because that's my experience, and regardless of state that I was in, has required our individual and collective consent. I mean, I'm sure there's some situations where people were quite literally physically forced into a position, right? But overwhelmingly, they coerced us, they manipulated us, they propagandized us. Yes, they did do all those things. They threatened us. You know what I mean? But it was us subjecting ourselves to that manipulation, propaganda, and threats that allowed it to occur. There wasn't any real actual forcing of things. And this is a tough one for people to wrestle with, where it's like, I was forced to get the shot or not work. And yes, I'm not going to argue that you weren't in a bad position there. That sucks. And again, even within the confines of their system, there's ways to hold them accountable, and even through common law and other ways. But the point is, had all the people in any given business, let's take, for example, maybe a hospital system. There's various instances where I would talk with a nurse and she'd be like, yeah, my 25 other employees don't want to get it, but they're going to because they're afraid of losing their job. Imagine if all 25 of those employees just said, no, not happening. I guarantee you that hospital, or I can almost guarantee you that hospital would have been like, well, fuck, our hands are tied. We're going to have to allow them to keep their job. And this sort of leads into authenticity and stuff too.
Yep. So I was in medical school when all this stuff happened. And so I was studying Chinese medicine and naturopathic medicine. And you'd think, well, of course, that school, a place like that would be very open to allowing freedom of choice and forced medical interventions from pharmaceutical companies, et cetera, like that would be, they'd be very understanding. Well, they weren't, and they were fully on board with forcing these tests and these injections and the masking and all this stuff. And I reached a certain point a year and a half ago, fall of 2021, and I just said, no, I'm not doing it. And I made a choice to walk away and to wash my hands. And I'm currently in the Oregon Army National Guard. And I'm not here trying to toot my own horn. I'm just using myself as an example because I walked through this. So I understand the fear, I understand the hesitancy, I understand the feeling of feeling like you're being forced to do something you don't want to do.
You're not tooting your horn, but I'm tooting your horn, dude. Because I commend. That sounds so weird, but I commend you so much for doing that. Because I interviewed Brad Miller, who was a lieutenant colonel in the Army, who came to the same conclusion as us, and said, "I'm not doing this either."
Yeah, and it's
So much
fucking
respect.
scary, man. I mean, you've served in the Army, you know that there's times when there are some scary threats, right? And they can follow through with it. And no one's going to tell them otherwise. So yeah, and I did that medical school and I just walked away and I said, you're not going to make me do this. Like, this is out of integrity for me, and I'm not going to sacrifice my character, my principles, my values on the altar of this career. And the same thing in the Oregon Army National Guard, they were saying you have to get this shot. And I said, okay, no, I'm not. And I met with my commander, and I will say this, like, my chain of command was, all things considered, I was very fortunate, and they know me. We have a really good relationship. There was a lot of respect. And so I didn't get the same kind of threats that a lot of service members did. But, I sat down with my commander, and he's aware I was in medical school. He's aware that, I'm fairly knowledgeable. And he said, I don't have to tell you all these things you already know, and such with science, etc. And I said, okay, well, I appreciate you having this conversation, sir, but, what am I looking at by saying no to this shot? And he said, well, we don't really know. It could be a dishonorable discharge, which is kind of a big deal. It could be, what's the word that I'm looking for when you have to go to court martial. It could be court martial, we don't know. Or you could just get a general discharge and we kick you out. Okay. So there was that lingering, nagging kind of like, oh fuck, there's something on the line here for me. And I had to say no, out of integrity, out of alignment. And yeah, it was scary. But again, going back to what you were saying, like, no one was forcing any of us to make this decision. It felt like it at times. It felt like we didn't have a choice, but you always have a fucking choice. And what this is part of the gift of the last few years, is that realizing that there is so much more power in making the hard decision that's the right decision than with just going along with it.
Bro,
right?
in the West Point Cadet prayer, and I have it, like, this is the West Point Cadet prayer right here, on, like, right behind me. And one of the things of it, which is so ironic, because overwhelmingly, and the U.S. military and its leaders are doing the exact opposite of this, and a lot of those are West Point graduates. But the West Point Cadet prayer talks about, or says, make us to do the harder, or to choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong.
Yeah.
And overwhelmingly, I see the exact opposite amongst the military. But it's so freaking true that choosing the harder right thing to do rather than just going along with the easier wrong, like, how much more free and fulfilled do you feel now?
Oh my God. In hindsight, I look back and I go, oh, thank you, God. Like, I look in the mirror and I respect the man that's looking back at me. I go, fuck yes, dude. You made the right decision. Good job. That feels good. There's nothing that replaces that. If I would have gone along, okay, sure, I wouldn't have had to, like, swim upstream. I wouldn't have had all the challenges. I wouldn't have lost my medical career, all these things. But when I look in the mirror, I think, dude, like, the cost of this was, like, you sacrificed your integrity. Okay, so that's one payoff. But, like, here's the thing, is, like, I believe that when you make the hard right over the easy wrong, and you essentially shut some doors, other doors open up,
Yeah.
And there's like this magnetism of abundance and blessing and good things, opportunity that opens up to you. And it may not happen immediately, it may not happen next month or in a year, but eventually in the long term, not only do you feel good about yourself, but something happens in the cosmos. And, you know, God just is like, dude, blessing. Here you
I'll
go.
say this to back you up on that is I'm making less money than I right now than I did when I was in the army.
Mm,
But I feel so much more abundant.
yeah.
My relationships are so much more authentic. I'm doing something that I enjoy that I believe is actually having an impact on the world positively. I have more time with my family. I have more time to spend with my kids. I'm not coming off of work feeling miserable. uh, was it a hard, like, luckily I left the army prior to
Mm,
the whole even consideration of the mandate and things like that, but regardless, just going down the nature of my choosing my authentic path and not allowing anyone else to dictate what I should or should not do or coerce me
yeah.
into a decision has paid off in ways that, I haven't even I didn't expect at all. And I feel
Mhm.
so much more abundant now doing this by just choosing to be authentic. And that sort of leads to the next thing I want to talk about, and that's the Ash experiments and the Milgram experiments. So, um, because what we're talking about is standing up as individuals, and it is
Mhm.
possible to do that. And of course, when we do things like this to stand up for our freedom that is inherent to our being and make that authentic choice, we create ripple effects where other people see that and then
Mhm.
they stand up as well.
For
And
sure.
it is much easier when a collective of people does it,
Mhm.
of course. And the power of this belief in authority. So the Ash experiments set out to determine how often people will conform to groupthink despite their own perceptions clearly indicating something that is the opposite of the group. So the way the experiment
Mhm.
worked is they had, I think, like 50 people in a room, and they had a series of things that they showed them, and the person that was being studied had no clue that everyone else was in on it, and all of them yelled out an answer that was clearly
Yeah.
not the answer that was shown in front of this person. And 75% of people conformed to the group at least once, meaning that 75% of people will go against um, their own perceptions, their own senses, and, even to some degree their own moral position
Yeah.
because of what the group thinks. So that's one thing. And then the Milgram experiments, 65% of the subjects uh, would inflict a what appeared to be a lethal shock. Essentially, how this experiment worked is they thought that they were testing this equipment that was delivering certain amount of shocks to someone, but really they
Mhm.
were the subjects. And there's an actor that was yelling out based on the level of shock
Mhm.
that they thought they were delivering. And over 65% of the subjects would deliver what was very clearly a lethal shock, because they would turn to the person running the experiment and say, is it okay if I do this? I mean, this dude's yelling that he's
Yeah.
feels like he's about to die. And dude'd be like, yeah, it's totally
Mhm.
fine. So then they
Mhm.
deliver, 65% of people would deliver the lethal shock. So that just shows the
Yeah.
power of the combination of groupthink with coupled with the belief in authority and the adherence to what authority says,
Mhm.
despite what your own moral position is telling you, and then also despite what you are clearly being shown happening in reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Dude, I know that those are kind of terrifying experiments in a way, but it pulls back the curtain on, the human psyche a little bit. Um, you know, my my messaging is on social media, my messaging has changed, like my energy has changed over the last few years, where it started out like really angsty and angry, and I'm
Mhm.
frustrated and I'm disappointed in everyone and the government and all these health institutions. I'm coming from this like, oh, wake up everybody, to now um coming home to myself, coming home to my own sovereignty, coming home to like my integrity and living in alignment and being in truth. My message is now like everybody needs to do that.
Yeah.
Trust in your intuition, trust in what you know to be true, regardless of what anybody else fucking says or thinks, including the people you love and respect the most. If you know something to be true, go with that. And so this is another one of the gifts of the last few years. And you're describing these experiments that clearly showed that like the human psyche is so open
Impressionable.
to, it's impressionable, it's open to manipulation, and to do like terrible things in the name of like outsourcing your thinking, outsourcing your feeling to
Yep.
some illusionary authority, you know. And so that one of the gifts of the last few years has been like people are kind of like coming back to themselves and thinking, no, I'd rather listen to myself and
Yeah.
to what I know is true. And that's one of my biggest messages right now. One of the biggest things that I encourage my daughters, my wife, my family, my friends to do is, well, what do you see? What do you think? What do you feel?
Mm.
Is it a fucking no inside, regardless of what other people are telling you?
Even
Then
what
the
you think,
answer,
even what you're, yeah. Yep.
yeah. Then if it's a fucking no, if you feel that in your body, you feel that in your gut, then it's a no. The right answer is no. And if the answer is yes, despite what other people are telling you, don't do that. No. Then go with the yes,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, dude, this is a really good point. What was coming up for me as you're saying that is there's a lot of people in the health, freedom, truther movement
Mm-hmm.
that have taken their position of blindly outsourcing and adhering to what the prevailing narrative experts say, and they've woken up at some point in time to the fraud of that.
Mm-hmm.
But they've taken with them the exact same consciousness of blindly outsourcing, and now just blindly outsource to whoever the most popular alternative spokesperson and talking head is.
Yeah.
And that's
A different authority.
yeah, it's exactly, it's missing the point entirely.
Yeah.
I don't like when it, as an example, when it comes to virology, like, yes, I have and even when it comes to this topic, authority, I have a very, very strong opinion on it. Very, very strong.
You and I are both agreed on those things. Yeah.
Yeah, which is ironic, but it's ironic because of this. We, like you said about the authority piece, you came to that on your own terms. I came to that on my own terms. And like I said, I found Larkin Rose and these other people. I was like, damn, oh, this is voluntarism. That's what I've been saying. That's the name for it. Wow. I see people who will just blindly outsource to Robert Malone, Peter McCullough, but I also see people who will blindly outsource to me. I had a conversation with a friend yesterday who said, I haven't really explored the no virus thing, but I believe you. And my response to that was, dude, no, you're missing the point. I don't
You're
want
like,
you
dude, that's
to,
not a compliment.
no, I don't want you to believe me, man. I want you to explore the no virus thing and come to your own conclusion on it.
Yeah.
There's this guy named Dr. Brad Campbell. He's a really good friend of mine. And I have a fuck ton of respect for him because he has explored the no virus thing heavily. He knows all the arguments, he knows all the positions, but he says, and this is the distinguishing point, he says he still believes in viruses. I respect that because he's at least explored it for himself, and he's not like, oh, well, now that I've explored this, I feel like I have to go that way into that position, and I need to find a sense of community surrounding something, which again, community is important. But the point is, he's still able to stand on his own 2 feet in his individual perspective. And he's like, yeah, I know all those arguments, and I know the genomic sequencing is fraudulent. I know that the cell culture isolation experiments don't make any sense or anything like that, but I still believe viruses exist. Now, I disagree with him, and of course, we have conversations where I'm like, Brad, dude, like, how could you not see this? But he's come to his own conclusion on the matter, regardless of what anyone says. And it's very nuanced. It's different than McCullough and Robert Malone and all of them, but it's definitely like not the same as mine. And that's awesome. That's the whole point.
Yeah. And I'm the same way. I'm like, yeah, let's disagree. Let's talk. Let's debate. Come to your own conclusions. You don't have to come to my conclusions. I think you're wrong, but but I respect that so much more than someone's like, oh yeah, dude, of course, just whatever you say. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
And okay, now I want to get into some like more specific topics on let's talk about voting first.
Okay.
So you're coming from the perspective that that I would imagine, like, given what you shared, you were coming from a more right leaning perspective, and like you were hoping Trump would be the one that would get in, right? Or am I wrong
Mm,
on that?
yeah, I was looking at it. Um, what is the best option
Yeah.
amongst terrible options?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Like,
Yeah,
even if you were recognizing like these are both absolutely dog shit options, but
yeah,
okay, Trump's the best one, and this is our best chance of turning the country. Okay,
right. Yeah. So fuck the guy, but like
yeah,
ideologically, I was kind of siding more with that.
cool.
Yeah.
Same. So leading up to, I'll say this, leading up to the 2020 election, I was very outspoken that Q is a psyop. One, but two, I
Mm-hmm.
was still leaning like, oh, we'd be much better off if we get Donald Trump elected than if we have Joe Biden. I will
Mm-hmm.
say this though, 2016 had just started waking up to the fraud of allopathic medicine and the truth of natural health and things like that. I was more I hesitate to say this because people be like, what? I was more supportive of Hillary at that time than I was Trump, just where I was constituted in my mind. Again, I was just waking up, and you may find that to be surprising that I'm an Army officer. But again, that I think was the starting point. A lot of my classmates had the same perceptions. There's a split, and a lot of them were more left leaning. I think now it's even worse. I think it's like entirely um, down the road of the leftist cult, which I think there is a leftist cult. I also think there's a MAGA cult though. But the point is,
Mm-hmm.
that's where I was coming from. And then now, regardless of whether there is legitimacy in voting or not, whether if they're selected or they're elected, or whether there's people behind the scenes, what are your thoughts on just the entire concept of voting?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's reduce this down to something a little bit more bite sized. And this is the example that I like to use when I'm having this conversation with people about democracy. Um, if a group of your neighbors, let's say 5 of your neighbors got together and they came and knocked on your door, hey Alec, we've decided that we're going to take half of everything you earn, but we're also we're gonna paint your house, we're gonna do your roof when it needs it, we're gonna do all the landscaping, we're gonna take care of the road, we're gonna shovel the snow when it snows, and but we're gonna take forcibly 50% of your income. And you look at them and you go fuck yourself. Like that's not gonna happen. Well, but no, but because 100 other of our neighbors said that we could do this, and you go, I didn't consent to that. I I think that's ridiculous. So their response is okay, and they throw you in handcuffs, and they throw you in the basement somewhere. That's democracy, and it's insane. So we've been conditioned to believe that democracy is this. It's an imperfect, but it's the most ethical, most functional system for propagating human freedom and independence. And the American system is it's not bulletproof, but it's really fascinating and a wonderful gift to
I love that
humanity.
you
And
sound like a politician right
I
now.
know, and you're like, and you look at it, if you reduce it down to the level of your neighbors, and you go, well, that sounds stupid. Well, the only difference is that we're talking about this on a much grander scale. And the other difference is that they've gone through some rituals, i.e., voting, the legislative process, and they carry official titles like representative and things like that. But voting, I want to say, is, in my opinion, it's just participating in an immoral system, and it's a way of giving consent to an immoral system.
Yeah, completely agree. And I would say, as that relates to, again, the last 3 years, where overwhelmingly the right is waking up to the government corruption, and of course, more now than ever, I tend to align in terms of my values more so with the people that would call themselves right leaning, that vote right, than I do the left, of course. But the problem is, you're continuing to prop up that system that you have identified as corrupt. And I understand the mindset of like, if we just get the right person in to change
Yeah.
it. But again, is it worth even trying to change or have someone that is a better so-called leader to be in that position where they are their perceptions and opinions, or the perceptions and opinions of the masses, are then imposed with a threat of force on everyone else.
Right.
And I would argue the answer to that is no. Just like
It's
your
still
your
tyranny.
analogy is
It's
perfect.
still tyranny,
Exactly.
just with extra steps.
Exactly.
It's with extra steps and the facade that somehow we're getting to participate in it, and so it's voluntary, or it's I don't know, but it's still tyranny, when you look at it and you reduce it down to its most basic form.
Yeah, and I think your analogy is so perfect. But then, like, other people come and say, well, maybe we should vote libertarian. What about that?
Okay, so libertarianism, like the main sort of central belief is small government and to hold up individual rights. I think it's a much better option
Yes.
within that system.
But
it's still within the same system that I think is fundamentally corrupt.
exactly. Yes. And again, I said this at the beginning, that's setting aside all discussions on whether our votes actually count or not.
Yeah.
Irrelevant. I think it's a red herring. It's a type of distraction from the central and fundamental point that the entire nature of the way this system is constructed, where the majority's perceptions are then imposed upon the majority and the minority, and then the indifferent in between, is fundamentally wrong, regardless. And the nuance that I was referring to at the beginning when it comes to state and local elections is that, so I'll say this, and feel free to jump in wherever and interrupt me. I do think that you can see actionable things actually occur at those levels. However, the only way in my mind that I could ever even remotely kind of consider voting at this point is if I knew that I was going to be electing someone, and then this is even if they were even allowed to be elected, someone who was very understanding of what we are discussing in common law, so that they could be sort of inserted there as like a quasi line of defense against the prevailing system, where they're like, okay, I am now in here as a insider, so to speak, for the voluntarist position, and I'm not going to do any of this nonsense. Anything that comes across my desk, sort of like when you're in the army and you have a brigade commander that's like a true badass, awesome dude that's like, all right, anything that comes from division that is ridiculous, I'm not fucking doing it, even if I get in trouble. Not happening. Right. And
that's rare.
That's rare. That's rare. But there are those types of commanders, usually at the like company grade, battalion level, maybe. But the point is, that is the only way I would ever consider voting, even at the local level.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Yeah, we just had some local elections and I decided not to vote. And I think I made some of my family a little upset. Like, how can you not participate? I'm like, well, because I don't believe in the system. But yes, there is something that you can do on the local level that does have immediate felt impact. And I still kind of feel like it's putting out fires. It's not an ultimate solution.
Agree.
And you're just kind of like it's like using pharmaceuticals. You're just chasing symptoms. You're not actually solving the root issue. You're not getting back to like core whole healing wellness, within that political system. You're just putting out fires.
Yeah. And
so it's not an ultimate solution.
No, I don't think so either. And just to jump in real quick, I think the concession is being made there in that case. And that's why I said it's like a strict concession consideration.
Yeah.
Because what I would hope would happen in that case is that person gets in and then they have a platform at that point within that system to then educate people on the true nature of the illusion of authority. And it's like, that would be the only case in which I would, because even at the local level, more effective than, okay, let's come together and we think that we want to vote these types of policies, is if everyone in that local level just said, we're not doing this anymore in this local level, and we're going to choose what's best for our own self. And that doesn't mean we're just going to go all willy-nilly and treat the earth like shit and like infringe and impose upon each other, but we're going to set up private agreements outside of this where it's like, okay, we're going to form a community garden over here. No, you need a permit for that. You need this, you need that. No, you don't. No, we don't. We're not buying into that anymore. Like, all of us are not doing permits. This area is a freaking abandoned lot that you say is owned by the city. We're going to turn this into a permaculture garden for the community.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. I was recently looking into beekeeping here, and I live in Washington State. And in order to have beehives, you have to register with the state. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, so I have to ask some strangers, a small group of people who don't know anything about me or my family, whether or not I can keep bees, which are from nature, which are good for food, with the honey and medicine and good for pollinating flowers. And this small group of men and women think that they have ultimate decision-making power to tell me whether or not I can keep bees. That's insane.
Well,
But it's
even
like,
further, here's another example too. Like, what if you wanted to grow cannabis on your
yeah.
property without a license, and you had people like 20, 30 people who are like, I want to buy that cannabis from you because
Mm-hmm.
I like this cannabis.
Mm-hmm. And you can be thrown in jail if you get found out and you didn't get the proper licensing and paperwork and all that stuff. And it's nuts. It's nuts. How did we as a collective come to the impression that this small group of people, men and women called government, who are strangers, who know nothing about us, know nothing about our lives, have the right to tell nature? They have a right over nature.
Yeah.
That to me sounds like insanity.
Yeah. It does. I mean, it is like utter insanity. And I can see the nature of the position that they're coming from, that, someone would say that if we don't have government in place, then people will just treat the land like shit. I
Yeah.
understand the argument that they're coming from, which is why, going back to the punk rock mentality of rebelling authority versus the
Mm,
embodied, what is moral, what is just, what is best for the earth, what is best for human health, what is best for the environment's health. I think, again, the misconception is that anarchy is the former rather than the latter.
mm,
And it's not that if there are no laws, we would just devolve into,
mhm,
just killing and looting and raping and pillaging and doing whatever the fuck we want and burning everything and just like completely stripping nature of all its goodness.
mm,
That's not the case, because what we're advocating for is that in the absence of authority, there is now room for us to have to impress upon society true moral contemplation.
mhm.
And that's the difference. And I forget if I said this earlier on with the podcast I was on earlier talking about this subject, or if I've said it now, and so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. But it's akin to, government is akin to telling your child no because I said so,
Mhm, mhm,
versus saying, hey, what do you think about this? How does this make you feel? How does this make others feel when this happens? When it happens
mhm,
to you, what do you like? What are the future implications of this? I want you to think about it for a little bit.
mhm,
That's the
mhm,
difference between the two. And when people argue that in the absence of government and licensing and things like that,
mhm.
that we would devolve into immorality and just be violently imposing upon each other, I would argue that's what we're already doing. And of course, the main source of imposing upon others is the very government, which is intended to be there allegedly to protect us from those who would impose on us
Mhm,
otherwise. And
mhm.
it's because, like I said, it's taking the what is agreed to be the moral position of the majority and then imposing that upon everyone else, thus creating a situation where they don't have to wrestle with and contemplate their own
Yes.
individual moral positions.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the important point, is the position that we're advocating for implies that individuals are doing the hard work of sorting through what is right and wrong for themselves internally. And when that is uh the dynamic that people are functioning on, you are much less likely to mistreat resources and,
Mhm.
and land in each other than you are if you have this sort of like illusionary government entity that allows you to outsource all of your thinking and feeling and morality and do whatever you're told, under the auspices that obedience is a good thing, whether it is good or not, whether that thing that you're being told to do is fundamentally good or bad. So
So something just hit me too. I think maybe for the first time ever. The I think that a lot of people, whether they realize it or not, know that there is something wrong with authority itself in
mm,
principle,
mm,
which is why there's a natural tendency for the what are perceived to be the lower level violations, if you will, of the system.
mm,
A natural tendency to do things like litter and things like that, because it's like, this is a minor infraction versus like, like doing something super immoral that could get me thrown in prison for a long time, which is why people then don't treat the earth well and do things like that, because it's like, this is seen as a minor thing
yeah.
within the system's rules. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned the parental thing with your
Yeah.
kids, right? I wonder if if this is a good point to talk about, like,
Let's
the
talk about
authority
it.
as parents. Yeah. Yeah. So what, all right, here's I'll say my position. My position as a father is, um well, there's two approaches to this, I think. One is, like you said, do what you're told because I said so.
Mhm.
And that is one approach to parenting that I would say for probably several generations, previous generations, was the norm.
Mhm.
And there is this idea that children are to be seen and not heard. Children
Mhm.
are to obey. Children are to respect authority and to do what they're told when they're told to do it. Okay. So maybe you have the right to do that as a parent. Sure. Okay. I'll lend you that. But what kind of adult comes from a home like that? It's the kind of adult, it's the kind of man or woman who does what they're told without questioning it. And so, what I see as my job as a parent is to form and to nurture and to cultivate my daughter's ability to think for themselves, to feel for themselves, to question, to think critically. And so, I have my daughters are 20 years old and 14 years old. And so, they're a little bit older and they're wise. Like, why do I have to do this? It's probably a little bit different than I think yours is a little bit younger.
5 and 2. Yeah.
5 and 2, yeah. So toddler wise are like, oh, they're incessant, right? Like, why? It's
Oh my
constant.
God, man. Yeah.
Yeah. But there is this, like, you want to cultivate the why with your
Mhm.
kids because you want them to grow up feeling like having a sense of personal sovereignty,
Mhm.
of personal autonomy, of having the capability of thinking for themselves and feeling for themselves and making decisions based on what is best, what is right, what is
Mhm.
good, rather than what some authority says. And that training starts at home with the authority of the parents, right? So we're their first experience of authority. And then that carries over into school. That's another experience of authority. And then that carries over into, law and government. But the parental authority is like the training ground. That's the garden. That's where I want to cultivate as a parent this autonomy, this ability to express fully and
Yeah.
freely who they are.
Totally agree. And it's overwhelmingly, I don't want to say overwhelmingly, but what I see a lot amongst what I would consider the more right leaning parents is that exact parenting style that you described at the beginning
Very
of
top heavy.
very top heavy, which is super ironic, because then you're wanting your kids to, when they grow up, not just blindly obey
Mm,
what government says. And there's some nuance and balance here, and I'm still exploring this as a parent, so maybe I'll turn this over to you. Is like, where is the line between guiding your parent or your kids and then taking a hard stance of like, no, you will not do that because you really are going to get hurt if you do that, you know?
I don't think that there's a universal answer to that
Yeah,
question.
I know. Yeah. It's just something, and maybe that's something for the audience to wrestle with too. Cause it's like,
Yeah.
you know, when we're operating from this perspective, I'll say this. So I've taken the approach with my kids, and I was sort of led into this by David James Rodriguez, who's also a voluntarist, and then Dr. Edith Ubuntu Chan, who also is a voluntarist, and it's called self-directed learning.
Mm-hmm.
So the environment that we're cultivating for our kids, and really just our son right now, because he's 5.5, is an environment where we're guiding him to things that, you know, he may we think he may be interested in to learn, and not showing any interest in math right now, which that's fine, or just like a little bit of interest in math, but he's very, very naturally inclined to be interested in reading. And rather than trying to force him to do math, because it's like, oh, there's this made up standard of you must be doing this at this age, at this time, in this way, that we don't adhere to anymore. We're like, what is he naturally inclined to want to explore? What is he naturally constituted to? And he loves reading, and he's 5.5, and he's reading full books by himself now.
Amazing.
Yeah. And another story, Dr. Edith, her son, the flip flop of that, her son is, I think, 8 years old, and he's already graduating to 6th grade level math.
Wow.
As an 8-year-old, just because he's naturally constituted to want to do math and learn. So it's like when we talk about the authority of a parent, it's that we're supposed to synthesize our experiences with this world and help cultivate our children. I think all children have this, a natural sense of curiosity and exploration, and sort of merge those and marry them together in a way where we're guiding our kids rather than authoritatively stating, you will, you must, you do this because I said so, because of either my made up standards or society's made up standards, which is usually the case. Society's made up standards surrounding something. And it creates an environment where they're having to wrestle with what they want, how they're constituted, how they interface and interact with their own reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Is our faith more in this arbitrary standard that society has set for us that we need to fit our kids into, or is our faith more in the beautiful design of our children's natural curiosity? Do we trust that their natural curiosity is going to lead them to discovering their purpose and meaning in life, and to do we cultivate that because we trust it, or do we trust the system more, and we need to take these children and, no, I don't care what you're curious about, I don't care what you want to learn, you need to learn this.
Yeah And that's a question that people have to wrestle with. That's a question I think it's important for us all to seriously wrestle with, especially if we have kids. And then I think now to sort of round this out, we didn't even cover taxation, but I think overwhelmingly, even if you're coming from like at this point a libertarian or right-leaning perspective, you know that taxation is theft. I mean, there's even the prevailing right-leaning alternative pundits are now talking about like that they want to abolish the IRS. So I think that's a given, that is absolutely a form of extortion, just like stealing money from us for no freaking reason, and God knows where it actually goes, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, to sort of round this out, voluntarism. I don't think anyone has an answer for what society could look like, or what society is supposed to look like. And that's the whole point. It's not, there is no, you know, as Larkin Rose calls it, there is no master plan that is a one size fits all solution that this is now the framework we're going to do with society, aside from abiding by the non-aggression principle, which I think is a common objective standard, but then also agreeing to operate in that framework that says every interaction between any individuals to organizations, or organizations to organizations, or anything like that requires the voluntary consent of both parties involved with it. But, you know, is there any redeeming qualities of law, of military? And we kind of touched on that at the beginning. And what would that sort of look like within this framework?
I know Larkin Rose, and at the end of his book, he talks a little bit about this, and he's like, you know, often what he addresses, like most often people's response to these ideas is, well, then what do we replace this current system with? And his conclusion, which is kind of where I'm at, is like, we don't know. We don't know. I think this is kind of where we started with the virology conversation. The same dynamic is like, well, then if it's not viruses, what is it? Well, it could be all these other options, or it could be all of the options together. I don't know. It's the same thing with this authority conversation. If democracy isn't the way, or if libertarianism isn't the way, and we're talking about voluntarism, what does that actually look like? We don't know because we've never tried it. But we know what isn't true, and we know what isn't ethical or what isn't moral. And so if we know that this doesn't work and this isn't right and this isn't true, then the best decision is the hard decision of leaning into uncertainty. Ooh. And trusting that we will sort this out.
That's beautiful, man.
That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just add this component in. We lean into uncertainty, knowing that Spirit, God, is a guiding light in all of this. Yes, there are people who will commit atrocious acts. Yes, evil exists in the world. God is a guiding light through all of that. So if we do the right thing, which isn't democracy, God will guide us. And I'm not getting into the religious conversation. That's not my point. I'm just saying that there is a source, a fountain of truth, of love, of light, of goodness, of wisdom, of discernment, of sound judgment. And if we trust that source, that spirit, that light,
that is within each of us,
Dude, we have the divine spark.
Completely agree. And I think that the more important question is, how will we help guide future generations to not have this massive trauma inflicted on them, to not have the suppression of all the conversations that we don't want to have, to not have the suppression of authenticity? How are we helping lead future generations to start developing these principles? Because this is something, if we are to turn the tides and dispel the illusion of authority, that is going to happen over generations. It's not going to happen overnight. And I wouldn't want it to happen overnight, because if it happened overnight, that's where it would devolve into chaos, because there's too many traumatized people in the world right now for this to really function in a way that I think it could. And of course, like, we have ideas on how this could work. We have ideas that we could throw out. I mean, I could, as an example, throw out, I think that we will have to go back to living really in tight-knit local communities that all come to an agreement on, okay, here's our, you could even call it a bill of rights, like not bill of rights, but a bill of agreements that we all come to as a community. Does everyone agree with this? No, I have a disagreement on that. Okay, let's reform this a little bit and let's deliberate on it. And then maybe that person's like, yeah, I'm not really vibing with the general sense of this community, but I have the right now to leave this community and go join another one if I want to. Or even if I come into that agreement, I can say at any point, this agreement, the way this community is constituted is just not working for me. I got to leave. And of course, like, another example is I think that there is redeeming qualities within what should be the foundation for the court system, in that like 9 people who are unbiased, and anytime there's a disagreement that those 2 individuals cannot handle amongst themselves, and they feel the need, which I think at any case it should be handled amongst the individuals first, and they feel the need to bring it to a higher level, to an unbiased party, they can bring it to a party of 9 people or 7 people or something like that, who don't know them that well, that can come to a determination on it. And
Yeah.
I think there's still some redeeming qualities of this system, where like a council of elders that is guiding the
Mhm.
community through wisdom and through love, something
Yeah.
like that. But again, I don't know exactly what the solution is, and I won't pretend to.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I wrestle with these ideas to myself from time to time, and I don't know if there is, an absolute right answer. But I think local governance, based on the principles of mutual consent, based on the principle of self autonomy, and obedience to conscience, you know, local governance, that you could have a board of elders, you could have like, deliberators or a court of some kind. Who can say? We haven't tried it, and it makes it even more complicated or complex in a world where we are connected globally, or we're connected to each other on earth through
I see what you did there. Yeah, yeah.
uh,
Who knows? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
through the internet and through TV and through modern mass communication, so there's levels of nuance and complexity to sort through and come into some conclusion, because we are so connected, universally now. um and there's going to inevitably be bad players that want to come in and co-opt the system, and they're driven by ego and they're driven by ambition. And so how do we keep these checks in place? How do we prevent a Genghis Khan or an Alexander the great conqueror coming through and co-opting these local communities? I don't know. I just know what I believe. My conviction is that the current system that we're in is unethical, and that we've taken away the integrity of the individual.
Completely agree. And, you know, a lot of people will push back against this and say that it sounds like what you're advocating for is an impossible utopia. And my
Yeah.
response to that is always no. What you are advocating for has already shown throughout history repeatedly to be an impossible utopia. And that is the idea that we can elect or select or have, or someone can rise up as a ruler within this form of governance,
Yeah.
and we can still operate in a truly free society with men and women who retain their own rights to live as they choose, so long as they aren't imposing upon others.
Mm-hmm.
That is the impossible utopia,
Yeah.
because we've seen it throughout history, and
Mm-hmm.
especially right now, to be the case. So why not try something new? And a quick point I want to make on the use of, let's say, not punishment, but what word am I looking for? It's like escaping me right now.
The use
Having
of force.
accountability, just
Mm.
accountability in general. I think that, let's say, a scenario where within this new system of agreements between individuals in a community, and someone is murdered, right? Like someone's
Mm-hmm.
murdered, and the person that they thought did it, that everyone agrees in the group did it, or in the jury, if you will, did it, is actually really innocent in reality.
Mm-hmm.
Or whether or not he is or is not innocent, I think that a new possible way of doing reform is not to punish this dude for life and send him away or lock him up, or even to execute him. I think it goes back to the old adage, hurt people, and it's
Mm-hmm.
to find a way to help rehabilitate this individual. And that's where agreements are established prior to the formation of this community. Once this man or woman turns 18, they sign an agreement that, hey, I agree to all these things. I agree that if I go through the court system and am found guilty for murder, that I'm going to do 10 years of some form of rehabilitation, where I'm closely guarded and watched by other elders within the community or something like that. The point is,
Mm-hmm.
there's new ways of doing this, and just because this hasn't been explored yet does not mean that this is not a possible way of structuring local communities.
Yeah. Yeah, we've just been so attached to this single paradigm that we haven't really given ourselves the opportunity to think outside of it and to explore other options that could very possibly be much better, much more effective.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so beautiful about this time in history is that both with this and so-called infectious diseases and health
Mm,
and just consciousness and all of it is it's a time for all of us to sort of reset, but not in terms of the great reset, but just sort of sit back and contemplate these things like, okay, we see this bifurcation. We see the path that the World Economic Forum and the technocracy and all those people, that the path that they're heading down. It's like, okay, we don't want that. And that's why it's so important to align ourselves with what we want to create rather than focusing on that, because that's not what we want. We've already established that. We already know
mhm,
what they're doing, and yes, we should be aware of it, but this is a time for us to now contemplate on what we want to create, on
mhm,
how health does work, on the
mhm,
nature of reality, on all those things. And it's beautiful. And that's why I'm so
mhm,
blessed with this opportunity to have conversations with badass people like you, because it's like we get to sort of wrestle with these things. And we
mhm.
get to say, I don't know, here's an idea,
Yeah.
here's a possibility. And we get to create the new reality that we want. And it really
Mhm,
is in our hands. The power is in our hands, both as individuals and as a collective of individuals who are coming together with mutual agreements.
mhm. Yeah, there's so much opportunity in the I don't know. And we do have so much power as co-creators to uh, generate a new generate new paradigms on a lot of levels. And I think that they're like, just like you said, like we're so focused on all this bullshit that's going on in the world. Um, we're perpetuating, when we focus on that, when we give our energy to that, we're perpetuating more of it. We're stuck in this fear, we're stuck in this lack, we're stuck in this negativity. We're going to magnetize, we're going to draw in more of that. We switch it and we go, no, I'm using my co-creative power. I'm using my creativity, my energy, the gifts that I've been given, the resources that I have at my fingertips to build.
Mm.
You know, I have we both have friends that are within the truther community that, you know, and they're constantly like, oh, did you hear about this? You hear about that? Like, oh my God, this thing's happening. And I used to get drawn into those conversations much more easily than I do now. I kind of ignore it now. My response is, okay, dude, what are you building? What are you going to do about it? What are you creating?
Yeah, man.
Cool. Yeah, we all know there's bullshit.
Yep.
Let's make something meaningful and life-giving and good. Let's be the medicine.
Yeah.
And in terms of, you know, future generations, we can think on these macro levels. The place I'm at in life right now, I really my conviction is, my strong conviction is, we affect the macro as we go deeper within and get in touch with the micro, the individual. So, you know, be the change you want to see in the world. Okay, kind of like a pie in the sky, like overused phrase. But there's truth to that. And I think that you become something more as a man or as a woman. And the ripples of that in your friendships, in your family, in your communities can expand, have expansive impact through generations.
Mm.
And so my focus 2 or 3 years ago was like so external and so focused on, I got to change this and I got to go after this. And I'm putting out fires and I'm chasing symptoms. And my energy has so shifted 180 to where I'm at now, where I'm like, right here, right in my heart, right in my spirit. My number one priority every day when I wake up is to feel good in my body.
Mm.
I go through my routine and I'm like, I am going to sit in silence and nourish my spirit in the presence of God, in the presence of my creator. I'm going to exercise and move my body. I do breath work, I do exercise. I'm going to eat good food. And in doing that, I have the absolute best opportunity to exercise all of my power and gifts in the best way possible with everyone I come in contact throughout the day. That's my number one priority is right here first. I got to fill my cup. I have to vibrate with the presence of God so that everyone that I come into contact with, there's a frequency exchange that up levels them, and it's just being in that presence and that state of mind. So yeah, we can talk about all these macro things, but I think like the true power, the true reverberation through generations and how we set up future generations for success is right here in our spirit, right here in our soul, right here in our heart, and doing the shadow work and doing the hard shit and healing ourselves and coming home to ourselves, and everything else that's good and perfect and beautiful flows out of that.
Yeah. To add to that real quick before we close out, imagine if everyone took that same approach of, rather than trying to fix the external world and change the external world and change other people, and just focused on like changing themselves. If everyone took that approach, that right there would dissolve the illusion of authority itself right away.
Different world.
Different world, man. Chris, this has been an awesome conversation. I don't even know how long we went, but
I
have no idea.
Yeah.
But man, that was great, brother. And for those who are interested in finding out about you a little bit more, where can they find you?
Yeah, right now probably the best place to find me is on Instagram. I'm at the Chris Linscome, the.chris.linscome. And that's where I'm posting a lot of content. I'm in process of other projects and upcoming in the future, but that's where you can find me for now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this, man. This was a blessing of a conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you invited me on. I love this. It's great.